I prepared a couple of cool positions for you guys. The main topic for this lecture will be about getting your knight to the f5 square as a potential outpost and how strong and some of the benefits of such an achievement could be. So this first game here came from a King's Indian defense. You can tell by the dark scored bishop on g7 and the locked pawns in the center, d6, e5 against white's pawns, e4 and d5. And earlier in the game, I'll show you guys real quick. Black played this move, knight h5, attacking white's dark scored bishop, and white played h4. And the point of this move was, of course, to open the h file and try to attack black's king. And these kind of flank attacks are generally most effective when the center is closed, because otherwise it would just be too weakening for your position if the center is kind of opened up and black can get immediate counterplay. But here the center is closed, so white can sort of leave their king in the center for now and try to attack on the king side. So black took this bishop. They captured this pawn on h4. Maybe it would have been better to play g4 to try and keep the king side closed. And after knight h2, h5, I think white still has a lot of options here to create a powerful attack. And also the f file is really a really useful asset for white. I think they could consider castling here, because now their king is super safe on the h1 square and the rook is super active on the f file. Or they could also consider like a move knight f1 with the idea to play knight e3 and then get to f5 anyway and launch an attack on the king side. But maybe that was a more solid option for black. In the game, black decided to take on h4. White played knight takes h4 and queen g5. So this was black's idea. They figured this g3 pawn was incredibly weak and that they can get immediate counterplay by activating their queen and going after this g pawn. But probably the player playing black here missed white's next idea, which was to play bishop g4. So the pawn is protected for the moment, and if queen e3 check, I think white can just play something like king f1, queen takes g3, and maybe knight f5. And the point being to sacrifice this g-pawn, but get the knight to f5 with the tempo and really get closer to black's king. Something really similar happened to this in the game, so we'll just take a look at that. But basically, after knight c5, black is attacking the bishop on g4 with their bishop, and white is pretty much forced to sacrifice the pawn on g3, which was, of course, white's idea. So white played bishop takes c8, queen takes g3 check, king f1, and now rook takes c8. So white played knight f5, queen f4 check, and queen f3. So white's idea is pretty brilliant, actually, because they gave up this pawn, but they got their knight to this awesome square on f5. And they're even willing to trade queens because that would open up the g file. And even though black is a pawn ahead, their bishop on g7 is a huge target for white's pieces. So next white will play rook g1, and black is going to have a hard time defending his position. Even if like king h7, rook g1, rook g8, white can do something like king e2, double the rooks on the g file, and black is going to be in huge trouble. They also have the immediate move knight e7, forking black's rooks, winning in exchange. But the main point of white's sacrifice is, of course, to create this target on g7 and activate the rooks along the g and h files and really cause a lot of grief. So any questions so far? I know you just walked in, but
I was doing my best, Bobby Fischer.
no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, any questions on any of that so far? Cool. So after queen f3, black played king h7, and white played king e2. Really nice move. Basically, the king is perfectly safe on e2, and next white's probably going to play rook f1 and force black to trade queens, or even a move like rook h4, and ask black to trade queens so that they can win in the endgame. So rook h8 was played, rook h4, black traded, rook g8, rook h1. This is a really strange move, rook a8, but basically, does anyone see white's immediate threat here?
Bishop first, knight takes bishop, and then
Well, if knight takes bishop, black will play king takes, and h6 is defended. But he has something even stronger. Yeah, let's say black just plays some random move a6.
oh, you can rook to take the pawn.
Yeah, very good. Rook takes h6, takes,
We take,
and we get this nice mate. So for that reason, black had to move the rook out of g8 to give their king a square. So they decided to play rook a8. Oops. And now, who can see a good way for white to increase the pressure here on black's position? Basically, their knight and two rooks are perfectly placed. And they can take this pawn in h6, but white wants to play for more. If they play knight takes h6, black will take with the bishop, they'll take with the rook, king g7, and white doesn't really have a good move there. They won back their pawn, but they didn't really get much of anything else.
Knight to b5?
That's a good idea. That looks like that wins a pawn, right? Because c7 is hanging, and then if rook c8, we'll take on a7. But you can play for even more than that. But
Take the knight with b4? Doesn't do you any good. He just goes back to the square.
yeah, b4, knight d7, and
He's fine.
not a whole lot. But you had the right idea at first. We want to get our c3 knight into the game somehow.
Should drop him back and then bring him to e3 eventually?
Exactly. Very good. So the second knight comes to e3, and from there it can either go to g4, attacking h6, or it'll even come to f5 to replace the first knight. And this plan is completely crushing. Black really doesn't have any defense for it. They play knight d7, knight e3, and king g8 was played, but if a6, white can sacrifice the rook again. And this basically leads to a decisive material advantage. Knight e7 check, and if king g7, who can find the best move here?
Knight, the other knight to f5.
Yeah, exactly. Other knight comes to f5, so this is the point. So that this other knight can come to f5, king f8, and white mates. So black played king g8. Pretty much the only defense to to this threat of taking on h6. And now it's time for white to switch targets. So what would be the winning plan here? Basically, white plays two pretty natural moves and black resigns. Yeah, very good. Just bringing both rooks to the g file, and black has no way of defending their bishop. Rook g1, rook h7, rook g4. And black resign. They're losing the piece no matter what, and with it, the game. So what's cool about that game is that it shows how strong white's knight can be even in the endgame. A lot of people assume that you can only attack when the queens are on, but of course that's just not true. If the opponent's king is weak, then you can attack as long as you have a few pieces on the board still. And this is what I wanted to show you guys. White basically sacrificed this pawn on g3, which looks very risky because the queen gets so close to white's king, but clearly white saw further and was able to evaluate this position as being very good for them. Eventually white plays rook h4, forces black to trade queens, opens the g file, and there's too many threats against black's king side. So any questions on that?
What was the game?
This is the game between Yuri Balashov was playing white against Jonathan Penrose. They're both grandmasters. So this next game follows the same strategic idea of sacrificing to bring a knight to f5 and cause a lot of danger to black's king. But here white sacrificed a full piece, as we'll see. So this was a really interesting moment, actually. White played knight g4 and attacking the e5 pawn and kind of inducing black to play f6, which might have not been a very good idea because now black's king side has been weakened. And then white played queen d2, threatening some kind of knight h6 check. Black played h5, weakening themselves even further. And white went back with knight e3. So white played their knight to g4 to induce some weaknesses, and now white is ready to attack. So black played bishop d6. And here, originally I was looking at this move h4, because I was trying to find a way for white to create a decisive attack. So the point of h4 is to play g4 next and open up black's king. And this is a decent idea. White definitely could have played this, and it's going to be hard for black to defend their position here. g4 is going to come, and I'll just show you guys. Let's say rook b8, g4, takes, bishop takes. And white's bishop comes to e6 next, and h5 is another idea, and basically black's king is slowly getting more and more open. And as you can tell, all of black's pieces are on the queen side and not really contributing to the fight, which is taking place on the king side. And another thing I want to point out here is that the center is, again, kind of closed. So that's why white is able to make moves like h4 and g4, which normally would expose their own king. But here, because the center is locked up, it's not so easy for black to punish white for extending themselves so far out. But playing white here was Vitaly Chekover, probably a grandmaster from 1934. His opponent was Vladimir Alotortsev, another GM. This was in the championship of the USSR back in 1934, and he came up with this idea, bishop takes h5, which is pretty ingenious. I always like looking at games from like 70 years ago because they didn't really have so many books and resources to study like we do. So it's kind of interesting that these players just came up with all these strategic ideas on their own that we get to learn from now.
So he does that to get the knight to f5.
Exactly right. So he gives up his bishop for a pawn, but after knight f5, white is getting a really dangerous attack. The immediate threat is queen h6. But another idea for white that's very strong is to play rook e3 and rook g3, bringing the rook into the game. So black played bishop f8, the most natural move, getting the bishop out of the attack and defending the h6 square. White played rook e3. One idea is to play rook g3. Another idea is to play rook h3 and just go after the h5 pawn and try to checkmate along the h-file. And even though white's down a piece here, it's hard to really believe that black has a good defense here because their pieces are on the queen side and not really participating in the defense. Like the bishop on a6 and the rook on a8, rook on c8. I mean, it's like they're not even in the game. But white has a knight, a rook, and a queen all ready to attack black's king. So a lot of times it's really useful to just count the material that's actually relevant to the attack. So here white's knight, rook, and queen are fighting against black's bishop, their knight on d7, and their queen. So basically, when it comes to the attack, white is doing very well. So king h7, queen e2, attacking the h5 pawn, queen e8, rook h3, and very difficult position for black, definitely losing. Rook takes h5 is next, followed by bringing the queen to g4, and white's attack is too strong. So a cool line here is queen g6, rook takes h5, king g8, and now rook h3, just going back, threatening rook g3. So king f7, knight h4. And I was just finding these interesting lines just for curiosity, but basically black's queen is can't stay on g6 and has to allow white's queen into the attack. So something like queen g5, we even have bishop c1, very nice move. Queen goes back, queen h5 check, knight f5, and black's queen actually ends up trapped. They have to give up their bishop with bishop g7, but of course white's attack is pretty devastating. Maybe queen h7 next with threats rook takes d7 and rook g8. So instead of queen g6, black could play bishop g7. And now rook takes h5, queen g4, and the threat queen takes g7, there's just no good defense for it. Like if queen f8, probably, let's see, what can white do here? Who can find the forced win?
Knight h6.
Knight h6 looks good, and then after king h8, okay, and then king g8. You're almost there. Just got to find one more strong move.
I was thinking rook h8, but that doesn't work, does it? Just takes the knight. Queen to g6? Yeah.
Beautiful. Very good, guys. So check, king moves, check, here. And rook h8 would win the queen, and I mean, the knight on d7 is also hanging, so that's definitely winning for white because they have the queen and a strong attack. But queen g6, actually queen g6 doesn't work. I'm sorry, because queen takes f7. But I missed that too, so no worries. But I don't know. I think this is enough for the win. King takes, and maybe start with this move. King has to go to g6. And I don't even want to take the queen here. I just want to bring my rook back and go for mate. But either way, a position like this is winning for white. At the very least, we can take this bishop, and looks like we have a queen for a rook and knight, a couple of extra pawns, and black's king is going to be weak until we finally checkmate it. So I like that example a lot. It's kind of a bit more radical than the previous one, because white basically sacrificed an entire piece. Just to get this outpost for their knight on f5. And now they don't even have so many concrete threats. Like after bishop f8, basically white has to make like 3 more moves before they make an actual threat. But black's position is so passive that there's not a whole lot they can really do to stop this. So white brings their rook in, and here the game is basically over. Actually, black took on h5 here. Kind of a desperate move, but queen takes g7, and that was it. So I want to move on to kind of a longer example, but a really instructive one about how this knight on f5 can just ruin black's entire position. Playing white here is the great Garry Kasparov. This is from 1980, so he was still pretty young, I think like 17 years old. And his opponent is Maya Chiburdanidze, who is a very good female grandmaster.
Was she women's world champion at one time?
I think so, yeah. So she was incredibly talented. So it all starts with this move g4. Again, I think most of these games came from the King's Indian defense, which is why we have the locked pawn structure in the center. And Kasparov plays g4 to start attacking black's king and try to attack along the light squares. So the threat, of course, to take on h5. Now black takes, and white has a good option here. They can either take with the h-pawn and open the h-file, or take with the bishop and try to exchange light-scored bishops and open the g-file as well. So let me give you guys a second to think about how you would recapture on g4, either with the bishop or with the pawn. And this is a really crucial decision. With the pawn? Does anyone else also want to capture with the pawn on g4? I see some head shaking. So with the bishop then?
With the idea that I can get the rook to the g-file.
Right. That definitely makes sense. What about the move rook g1?
Oh, do it first.
Just right away? I don't know, I just noticed it now. I didn't really analyze it before, but I think it's really interesting, but maybe unnecessary. In the game, Kasparov just took on g4 with the bishop, and I think this was the right decision, because black's light-scored bishop is probably their best defender. It's controlling all of these light squares. And by exchanging these bishops, it'll be a lot easier to attack black. And black's bishop on g7 is, of course, a really passive piece. So black played g5. I'm really not sure about this move. Maybe knight d7 was just better, just to keep the bishops on the board. I don't know. I think g5 is incredibly weakening, but we won't really analyze it too much. Black played g5. White exchange on c8. And here, bishop g3. And I think white's position is really good. Like, black's king on g8 is pretty vulnerable. So next we're going to play knight e3, knight f5, and h4, and open the h file. And eventually queen f3 and castle queenside. And black is a bit behind in development, so they can't really create any kind of counterplay so far. They would love to play like a6 and b5, but right now they're just not developed enough to do it. So I think white's position is just really good here, and probably Kasparov would win. But he decided to just play knight e3 immediately, which is pretty radical. Basically giving up this bishop on the spot, but getting the knight to f5 immediately. And I don't know, I mean, he won a really brilliant game here. And I'm glad he did, because it gives us some instructive material. But I think just retreating the bishop and playing h4 was also a great option. And not as risky, because here he is sacrificing a piece. But knight f5 was played, queen d8. And his idea is just to triple his heavy pieces on the g file and try to destroy black's position. But he had to see really far for this to work, because at first glance, it really doesn't look like white has enough for the attack here, because black has this square in g5 for their knight. Seemingly, that should be enough to sort of defend their position. But queen g4, knight g5, and here knight takes h4. And this is Kasparov's ingenious idea. He just takes this pawn. He's going to put his knight back on f5, and then play h4 and kick black's knight. So incredibly, white's attack is progressing extremely slow, but the center is closed, black's pieces are still on the queen side, and there's just not enough time for them to really set up some kind of good defense here. So rook c7, knight f5, a6, h4, knight h7, rook g1, queen f8. And white actually doesn't have a breakthrough here just yet. Like if h5, black can come back with his knight to g5. So king e2. And here I don't know Maya playing black, at what point she realized that she was completely lost. Or probably after he made this move, I think she realized that her position was just pretty much hopeless. The problem is black has no counterplay against white's king, and white's just going to triple on the g file, and eventually black won't be able to defend white from breaking through. So rook a7. Black wants to play b5 and defend along the 7th rank. And I love this move, a4. Just white has all the time in the world. They can prevent black from getting any kind of counterplay. And they're basically playing down a piece, but it doesn't feel like it. So b6, queen h5, king h8. Brings the other rook to the g file. b7. Black really doesn't have anything to do other than wait. The knight on b8 has no way of getting out, because it would, like if black played rook f7 and knight d7, then g7 would be hanging there. And black doesn't want to play a5 because white's other knight would come to b5 and then eventually just take on d6. So queen g4, c7, rook g2, king f1. Basically, white has all the time they want. Black really can't make any kind of progress. But of course, eventually Kasparov has to find a winning plan, because right now g7 is just protected enough. So knight e2, queen c8, and here he plays f4. So the idea, of course, is that if black takes on f4, knight takes f4, knight comes into e6, and black's bishop is just lost. White has 5 attackers, black has at most 4 defenders, and that's game over. But of course, black doesn't have to take on f4. But so the real idea of this move is that it controls the g5 square. And now white can push their h-pawn without worrying about black's knight coming back to g5. So really great attacking idea. b5 was played. Pretty much a desperate try to get counterplay, but obviously there's nothing we can suggest for black here other than doing anything really. So white took this pawn, rook b7, h5, knight f8. Here white has a lot of wins, and if you guys want to try and suggest a winning plan or winning try for white, by all means, go ahead. h6 looks pretty good. Let's see. Don't even know what to play here for black. Knight takes g6. Probably queen takes. So bishop takes here would lead to mate. Or well, devastation. And otherwise, white's ready to take on g7 and play rook h1 or rook h2, and black's king is getting mated. I think rook h6 was also winning. Bishop takes h6. We have queen g8 checkmate. Knight h7 takes h6. This is also good enough for the win. But the move Kasparov played is maybe even the strongest move. He played queen h3. So black took, and the idea is to play h6. So c4. h6, probably takes, check, and I'm sure there's some knight h6. This is good enough, right? I think this is good enough too. Don't worry about that. Yeah. That's how winning this position with white is. I mean, I looked at it with the computer, and it's like, the top 8 moves for white are like +4, all the way to like +11.
That's how you know you're playing a good game.
So the game concluded knight takes g6, hg, king there. And now white's not even down material. And of course, with the extra piece and queen h8 next, it's black resign. So this was probably, like the crowning game of this strategic idea, because it was like black's position was so bad that white was just in no hurry to really do anything too fast. But Kasparov came up with this ingenious plan to just play queen g4 and then just take this pawn and then push the h pawn. I mean, I think that would be really hard to find during the game because your instinct is that white needs to create some threats really quickly. But here, what Kasparov realized is that black was just not in any position to develop and try to defend his pieces or his king, and white had just enough time to basically bring all their pieces to their perfect spot and eventually break through. When your position's this strong, it's almost impossible not to break through. You know, it's just too perfect. And then this f4 move I really like, just controlling the g5 square and finally bringing the last piece into the attack, the h pawn. And yeah. Cool. Well, that's all I had prepared for you guys today, so stick around.